I don't care how long you've been a political pundit. There's stuff going on in this country now that you've not seen before. Now you can, I think, with the kind of history that Gary Dietrich has had, you can find magnetic north and help the rest of us find magnetic north in a way that we wouldn't be able to find maybe without some help. But I still challenge even the great Gary Dietrichs of the world to somehow frame all of this in a way that we can better understand. He is the political pundit and political analyst for iHeartRadio and across the CBS television network. How about it for our Monday regular, Gary Dietrich, everybody. Looking good, sir. Happy New Year.
Hey, Happy New Year to you too, Mark. And I know for some in our audience, and including you, today, a very mixed day in many ways. I understand that. But still, Happy New Year. The page gets turned. Here we go. We're on to another one. And if you want me to real quick, Mark, comment on what the intro there about kind of putting this in modern political perspective, I'm happy to do that.
Please.
Okay. Well, here's the deal. I've been doing this over 30 years and based out of the state capitol here in Sacramento, which, by the way, no question about it, in light of the Trump ascendancy version 2, I mean, California is going to be, in Sacramento more specifically, even going to be ground zero. I mean, it's going to be ground zero for everything that doesn't come out of D.C. and the administration, both because of Gavin Newsom, because we'll see what Kamala Harris comes back to the state and does. Is she going to run for governor in 2 years? Is she not? Is she going to make another bid for 28 and announce that, in the next year or so? Who knows? I mean, her people say she doesn't really know yet. She's got 2 weeks more to serve as vice president, and then we'll see. But there's that piece of it. The other piece of it is a very interesting poll that came out, and this is going to upset some people, but it's the numbers that CNN came up with. And that is, they asked people, okay, so is January 6th and all the stuff surrounding that, which I think there's widespread consensus that was not a good day, there'll be some exceptions to that in the hard right, but for the most part, people know it wasn't good. Even though people sort of agree with that sentiment, Mark, the number of people that CNN polled have said, this is a top issue. This is something that, influenced my vote. It's something that was really like number one priority to me. The number, 5%. And that is why Democrats, interestingly, though you're absolutely right, going into 24, I said, look, people, you think you saw crazy in 2016, excuse me. You think you saw crazy in 2020. You haven't seen crazy yet. You're going to see it in 24. And that's exactly what we saw. It was unprecedented in so many different ways, from assassination attempts for candidates to a sitting president stepping aside 3 months before the election. I mean, so many things happened. But at the end of the day, as they used to say in my classes at Harvard, Mark, the bottom line, people said, the economy, my job, gas prices, immigration, whatever, are more important than those issues.
That's interesting because, by the way, Tony, I don't know, but make sure that Gary's not too hot on his level because he's a hot personality. I just want to make sure people don't. It's interesting you say that because I was hearing in internal polling they were doing in the lead up to the election that the J6 thing was a big deal to people. And you're saying just the opposite. Put another way, 95% of the people polled didn't give an S about J6.
Well, I want to nuance that a little bit, Mark. They cared, okay? They weren't happy about what happened 4 years ago. I want to be really clear about this. It wasn't that they didn't care, especially the majority of the Democrats, but even about 20% or so Republicans said, now that was not a good thing. But was it going to be determinative of their vote? That's what Democrats, remember, were counting on as clearly one of their top 3 issues, along with abortion. Maybe after that, distant climate change and some other things. But remember, it was about process. It was about protecting democracy. And it was also about abortion. Well, that issue of democracy and of January 6th, it had faded so much in people's consciousness relative to what they were experiencing every time they went to the gas station, the grocery store, their own jobs. See where I'm going with this? It was just in terms of prioritization, not determinative of their vote. And of course, the outcome validated that. that, that in all these states, over 90% of U.S. counties saw a drift, an increase in the vote towards Republicans, towards Trump, to varying degrees, of course. But that said something, and that was people were not happy with the current direction of the country. And we knew that from polling where people said they were very dissatisfied with the direction of the United States.
This goes to public perception of what issues are most important. And when it gets to that, it always strikes me that it gets to messaging and media, what's out there. I think the right has a great media machine, the left less so. You may look at things, not you personally, but one may look at things and say, hey, well, look at MSNBC and CNN. They're not lefties of the sort that you see the loyal righties are on Fox News Channel. I mean, I saw a lower third super with it was a Trump rally or something, and it literally was finally a real president speaks. I mean, it was like, I'm thinking, that is not a super, a lower third super you would ever see on CNN or on MSNBC in any kind of way. So I see the right-wing media as having carried a lot of water for Trump and the right, and having characterized some of those issues to which you've referred, and all of them resonate. I suspect they all resonate and land. But I think they characterize them as perhaps those that Trump could make a difference on more than he actually could. We know he can't influence gas prices. We know the president can't influence egg prices. The bird flu, which we're going to talk about later in the show, that's having a big effect on egg prices as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is media, and finally social media, has had a huge effect on American political discourse. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just a quick bifurcation here. So on the politics of things and the communication of politics, absolutely no question that over the last, say, 2 election cycles, especially, the rise and influence of social media has been tremendous. Okay. And here's an interesting thing about that. Democrats themselves have now, there's a lot of mea culpa going on inside the Democratic Party that, for example, when it came to things like certain podcasts, right? And I don't need to mention names, you pretty much know who they are, but national podcast influencers, Democrats have said, we missed the boat on that the Trump people had tens of millions of views that we missed out on, some of which purposely, like the Joe Rogan podcast, that they did not put Kamala Harris on. Most of them now say that was a big mistake because we did not get the views. We didn't get the airtime that Trump did. So I want to, say that there's that. On the policy side of things, here's something else really interesting. If you pull the political camera back, pan it even further, Mark, to borrow a Hollywood term, what you're seeing now, take a look at what happened to Trudeau today in Canada, stepping down as prime minister. Why is that significant? Because it was a real interesting thing. If people know Fareed Zakaria over on CNN, who does a pretty good job of analyzing things in terms of international politics, he did a very interesting piece. I encourage people to watch, about 5-minute piece over the weekend on progressive administrations globally, in different nations, what has been their political fate in the last 2 to 4 years. And he said almost universally, they have either left or their power has decreased, and Canada being the most recent sign of that. Why is he pointing that out? Because he said part of the problem is people's perception is that those progressive administrations were not central and sensitive to their main concerns: crime, immigration negative impacts, the economy, et cetera. So he's painting it more in a global picture, that there's more of a shift away from progressive politics, interestingly, more globally, not just in the United States right now.
That's fascinating and concerning, isn't it? And I like that you reference the Trudeau situation because, what was he in there, 9 years? I mean, he was a Canadian head.
Actually, 11 years, believe it or not, he's been in there.
So, I mean, I think him stepping down is more than just like a footnote. It may be a sign of a watershed moment. And we've seen the rise of these autocracies. I mean, it's more than just the recession of progressive policies. We've seen the rise of the right across the rest of the globe. And we've seen the rise of these autocracy. I think of like a Viktor Orban. It's like a soft fascism. It's not the kind that we're used to seeing in those black and white pictures of World War II. And you know what I mean, Gary? It seems to me as though if there were to be a rise like that in this country, it might take on that kind of face, the face that we've seen in Hungary, for example.
Well, I think, it's always hard in politics to paint everything with one gigantic brush. So you're going to have people sort of non-progressive politics, call them more conservative. Some people call them clear out to the fascists, which of course Trump got labeled that. But the point of the matter is, there's a rightward or at least center-right drift is the point that Sicario was making. And I think that's pretty undeniable when you look at who's been elected. Are there going to be people way out on the fringes on both sides? Certainly. I think it's going to be really interesting, for example, Mark, new president of Mexico, okay? A female president, not typical for most in Mexican politics over time. But who's going to be the new prime minister at our northern border? And those two relationships, I think, are going to be very interesting because Trump, of course, is going to be moving things certainly more center right. And, the president of Mexico, not so much right now. And we'll see where the new PM of Canada goes. But I think that, right on our borders, there's going to be interesting dynamics. What's going to happen with immigration with those two nations? What's going to happen with tariffs with those two nations? Trump, of course, has made a threat, 25% increases. We'll see if that takes effect. Some people think that was part of Trudeau's downfall, that he didn't stand up to that more strongly. So I just think it's going to be really interesting to see, even on our adjacent neighbors, how this international political scene plays out.
Donald Trump, despite what he says, Gary Dietrich, about how the economy's never been in worse shape, we're the laughingstock of the world, he's inheriting the best economy since George Bush took office. And I'm just wondering how long it'll take with some of the things even to which you've referred, with the tariffs. And, he's not a guy to kind of just leave things alone. He just can't wait to lift his leg on a lot of different things. Again, these are my these are my thoughts, not yours. But I'm just curious from the way you look at things. And he is, along with his people, I'd call them henchmen, but again, those are I have a very arch, biased way of looking at it, perhaps. But I guess all I'd say is his advisors and he seem spring-loaded to start making some changes. Dangerous, maybe, in a situation where the economy is really in pretty good health, even as Americans struggle, I understand, in ways in which Trump was able to exploit politically. I mean, legitimately exploit politically. I don't mean to say that was a bad exploitation.
Well, I think what's interesting now is you don't have unanimity amongst economists and amongst business people about what the broader Trump agenda is going to do to the economy. In other words, there are people very concerned about tariffs. If they jump too fast, too quick, what effect is that going to have? Oil prices, people are wondering, hey, drill, baby, drill. And if Trump is successful in moving some of that agenda forward, especially in the next year or two, is that going to have a dampening effect? Some people think it's going to, on gas prices, on energy costs, and that will be helpful to the economy. Trump's tax cuts, are those going to get extended? And what effect will that have on the economy? So there's a lot of unknowns, Mark. Where is the mortgage interest rate going to go? Everybody looks at it as sort of like a middle class benchmark for how people are feeling. Is the housing market, which has kind of been in the doldrums the last year, is it going to be jump started if we see the Fed begin to bump down that rate more significantly? So there's a lot of unknowns. Anybody that tells you they can, say definitively what's going to happen to the economy, it's that old joke about, an economist. You might as well flip a coin. That's about as good as you're going to get in terms of getting a PhD in economics.
We started with this, and I'll circle back around to it, Gary. What do you think Trump and his people clearly wanting to, in some way, reimagine the way January 6th is viewed by history, reconstitute January 6th in some way? He's talked about pardoning the J6ers. He has that national anthem that they're all, those who are incarcerated, singing verses of. What do you think the realities are? And again, I'm sorry, a lot of what we do, I do ask you to maybe, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but you really understand the political landscape with the detail that many of us don't. What do you think the reality is concerning him being able to, in some way, reimagine this day in American history as an act of patriotism on the part of his supporters?
Yeah. I don't think you're going to change many minds when it comes to something that stark. For example, are people going to change their minds about whether this is a patriotic act or not? No, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's pretty well baked in. We know that from polling. Those numbers have not really changed. What has changed is what I shared earlier. How important is that perspective on J6 going forward? I think, American politics is very notorious for being very what's happening right now. Okay, like I mean, we're going to face another election cycle now in 22 months. Okay, people are going to be voting again. That could have a huge effect if Trump does not and Republicans are not able to hold on to the House. Probably not going to get the Senate. We can dive into that another time. Why the mechanics of the seats up in 26 don't lend themselves to Democrats, but the House is up for grabs. There's no question about it. Historically, especially in a second term, presidents don't do well increasing their majority. Republicans are very well aware of this. Okay, so the bottom line is, I don't think people change their minds about January 6th. I think what they're going to, the Trump people, I think, are hoping they'll change their view of a Trump legacy based on what he's able to accomplish this second time around. I mean, if his administration does not do well, if the economy falters, if there's significant international issues that he cannot get under control, I don't think people are going to look very favorably on a second Trump term. And they're not going to blame January 6th. They're going to say we're blaming ourselves for reelecting you. Okay, so that's the way it's going to look. I just think going into 26 and then especially 28, where it's going to be wide open on both sides, and a new president's going to come in one way or another. I think those are going to be the real markers about how people, whether January 6th is at that point a complete faded memory, or whether it's like, maybe that had some more resonance than I thought because these last 4 years have sucked.
The poll to which you referred at the beginning of our conversation about where J6 ranked in terms of importance for those polled, and it didn't rank at the top, is that the reason you think that Democrats didn't cry foul in this election in some way? We hear and have been party to a lot of questions about the election. I mean, you can go all the way to manipulation, or you can just go to, gosh, there are issues involving Russian interference and other aspects of the election that call everything a bit more suspect than we're hearing. The Democrats went quietly. I mean, Harris conceded, and there has been no call for recounts in any way. The 14th Amendment questions that seem to be demonstrably there. I mean, an adjudicated insurrectionist, adjudicated in Colorado, in the J6 hearing as well, hearings and impeachment. So none of these things seem to take traction. Is the reason for all of that what you talked about at the beginning of this conversation, which is because of politics? This is something that Democratic politicians just didn't want to talk about because it just doesn't land with the American people in as important a way as it should, in their view.
Well, yeah, I think you're onto something there, Mark. I think there's a widespread view amongst many, even in Congress, Democrats that got elected in Congress, we missed the boat on this election. We were not talking about the right things. And they based that on the second component, which is, Trump not only winning every single swing state, and we went down those swing states, Mark, ad infinitum, and what might be vulnerable and what wasn't, and what were the important issues there. Well, you know what? It turned out that this January 6th, this democracy issue did not resonate, okay? Not only in individual swing states, but nationally. When Trump won the popular vote is when I think it put to rest any thought of questioning the outcome of this election, right? Now, people could talk about it all they want, but I think, even James Carville has come out, as others like him, long in the tooth Democrats who've been through a lot of cycles, said, you know what, we weren't talking about the right stuff. And I think that is to your point. It's sort of like now it's a very interesting nuance that you're beginning to hear come out of Democrats in Congress, both in the House and the Senate. Look, We have to find ways to, work with Trump. We're not going to oppose him wholesale like we did 8 years ago, but I think they're looking at crafting a more nuanced message that gets back to some of their core focus with folks in labor, folks in the middle class, and as they say, doesn't focus on politics and process going on that kitchen table.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, and that's interesting, the failure of the Democrats to connect with the populace in any kind of significant number, that might be it, that they are so shamed, maybe. Like when you mentioned Carville, I mean, I think that's what that's all about. You know, his penance is going on, YouTube and, declaring how he missed the boat on this and how Democrats missed the boat. And you end up with this, the lessons learned thing that we're kind of seeing there in that still frame of Carville talking. I mean, you see them going through the ashes of this election, having maybe learned a lesson. Last thing, super last thing for you. I feel as though Americans and most people vote with their gut. And I think once their gut tells them something, then they fill in a lot of details like, oh, it's the price of eggs. Oh, it's whatever it might be. It's the immigrants, et cetera. Give them the reasons they're voting for you. But the real reason they're voting for you is because of a je ne sais quoi. I mean, I think Trump is in a legitimately charismatic figure. I think he is an effective, for me, in my judgment, he's a con man. He's a BS artist. But to his credit, he BS'd a very BSable public into, again, the greatest reconstitution of a political life in the history of this country, in my judgment. The Democrats, I don't see a rising charismatic figure. Do you?
Well, that's a great question, Mark. We're talking already about the bench for 2028 and who's going to lead the party sort of in a de facto state between now and then. I mean, in the past, we even had Nancy Pelosi, right? Pretty strong figure in Congress. You don't have that in Hakeem Jeffries, and most people, hard pressed to even the average person on the street to tell you that Chuck Schumer's the leader of Democrats in the Senate, right? So I think there is a wide open field. What is the role of a Gavin Newsom going to be? What is the role of a Josh Shapiro out of Pennsylvania going to be? His state, of course, did not get carried for the Democrats, which raised some questions for people about his political power and future. What's going to be the future of Kamala Harris? Is she going to be given another shot? Is she going to be seen as, okay, well, now that she has sort of a level playing field, a clean slate, she'll do better? Well, there's real mixed feelings about that inside the Democratic Party. I will go back to one thing about Trump that I think is very interesting that you make, I think, an important point on, Mark, and that is personality, okay? And I really do believe that one of the tipping points in Trump's favor, and it was tragic, certainly on one hand, but that assassination attempt where he actually came away bloodied, I think softened Trump's image in a way that many people didn't fully account for. That there was a sense of, oh my gosh, this guy's human. And he literally came an inch away from being killed, right? I think there was something about that, it's just in the American spirit. It was, I don't know if endearing is the right word, but certainly it just started with people, wow, this is a guy. Okay, I know he seems like a cartoonish figure, but he's a guy, okay, with a wife and with kids, and he almost got killed and he was bleeding out of his ear. I mean, you hear where I'm going with this? I think that did something to personalize the former, now the newly elected president in a way that probably few things could have.
Well, he sold a lot of sneakers from it, I'll tell you that. I'm sorry. It is a serious thing, and yet he made it, he couldn't wait to sell sneakers around it. It was crazy. I mean, there is this weird marriage of the insanely serious, to which you just referred with an assassination attempt, and then the utterly absurd, like SNL level ridiculousness of selling merch around your assassination attempt. It's absolutely nuts. So I understand, but that's our new daddy, and we have to kind of get our head around it. Daddy does weird stuff. Gary, I love you. You take my I understand, admittedly, I'm an open partisan. I'm not a Trump fan. You take the stuff, I dump it on your table, and somehow you make it a beautiful thing and an understandable thing. I'm so grateful for your involvement with the show. Happy New Year, pal, and I look forward to a lot more conversation. Thank you.
Here's to a great year ahead, Mark.
Gary Dietrich, everybody. Thanks, Gary. By the way, Gary is, of course, the CBS analyst and also the analyst for iHeart radio stations, but his segment here is sponsored by Bill Campbell at Remax Gold. And let me tell you, particularly my Northern California friends, if you are relocating into or from Northern California, you need a highly respected real estate professional, and that highly respected real estate professional is Bill Campbell of Remax Gold. Call or text Bill 530-448-7474. 530-448-7474. Bill Campbell at Remax Gold. Thanks, Bill. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.